Alright, this is Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 1, Episode 3. And hoo boy, if you weren't sure the producers thought Skye was going to be the breakout character of this show before this episode, you were damn sure after it. Even more so than in the first two installments, Skye is front and center here, something which might have gone over better had it happened later in the season. At this time, it might have been pushing it just a tad. So let's take a look at the asset and figure out why. The team is called in when a S.H.I.E.L.D. scientist, whose name comic fans should recognize, is abducted in pretty spectacular fashion. Their search leads them to Tomo Pennickett's evil twin. Skye does computer stuff that convinces Coulson to send her in undercover. They find the scientist, all hell breaks loose, the day is saved, but the scientist is not. Or so they think. In an end credit stinger infinitely superior to 084's, we see that he may not be all the way gone, and the next time Coulson and company run into him, he just might look a little bit more like this. Also, this shot happened. Yeah, that is never not gonna look weird. First off, I love how this episode began. This opening, to me, was more like what the pilot should have done. You get the setup, you think they're going one way, but then they go a different way. So there's build-up to something, and then the payoff works, unlike in the pilot where you got one but not the other. The foreshadowing was much more obvious this week, but I thought it was handled in a clever way that worked very well here. There's suspicion from the beginning that someone in S.H.I.E.L.D. has leaked information allowing the scientist to be captured, and that it's very neatly tied up by the end of the episode. But at the same time, they planted the seed in your mind that double agents within S.H.I.E.L.D. are not out of the question, while dealing with that possibility early on and seemingly resolving it, making the audience less likely to suspect it when the shit would really hit the fan in episode 17. We're introduced to our first recurring bad guy, and one of my favorites of Season 1, Ian Quinn. I really like the actor they cast for this role. He just plays the rich, smarmy douchebag so well. And he turned what could have easily been just another villain of the week like last time into a character that would play an important role later on. See, a lot of people were complaining about the standalone nature of these early episodes, but like I said before, you really couldn't write those off. Because when Whedon's involved, these things tend to come back in unexpected ways. Speaking of bad guys, we also saw the origin of the show's first bona fide Marvel supervillain, and the writers swung for the fences when they chose this one. Franklin Hall was one of the characters I figured they'd never use on this show because I didn't see how they could possibly replicate his powers on a TV budget. But surprisingly, I think they managed a lot of it with just some clever camera work. And not only did they show that they could do the gravity powers justice, they made him look pretty cool too. Another big plus was that the non-stop Marvel references were toned down to a reasonable level this week. And instead of dropping them every 5 minutes just for the hell of it, which did get a little too cute last time, they only dropped them when they were appropriate. And in a nice nod to continuity, one of them is actually brought up as a motivating factor for Franklin Hall in the climax. But most of the spotlight belongs to Skye this week, and that's where we start running into problems. Chloe Bennett seemed to be getting more comfortable with the character by now, but with this being the third episode in a row with Skye as a centerpiece, she still felt a bit much. After being treated to the preferable street-smart fish-out-of-water Skye last week, this week we were mostly dealing with her alter ego, super awesome hacker Skye. And for the record, she would spend most of the first two-thirds of the season oscillating between these two modes, before they eventually would coalesce into the much more likable version of the character that we have now. But before that would happen, we had to go through some stuff. Miss 2 Coolio for Schoolio scores an Evite to Ian Quinn's party with her phone so easily that it's almost comical, all the while not being serious about the training Ward is giving her that's supposed to keep her alive when she goes in. I think her being non-committal about it is meant to be charming in a way, but it's really not. I was with Ward on this. She was going in unprepared and didn't appreciate the very real possibility that she could be captured and or killed. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happens. She gets made by Quinn almost immediately, gets in way over her head, and needs to be extracted before she eats a bullet. She does disarm Quinn of his gun in one scene, showing that some of Ward's training did in fact sink in, but since we'd only seen her goofing off during her training earlier, that moment ends up feeling kind of phony. Plus, the whole conflict of the episode involved sending Skye on a mission unprepared. But then she pulls one over on Quinn just by charming him, essentially, escapes and runs away from a situation where being more prepared likely would have helped her, and then needs to be saved by Ward when confronted with multiple assailants against whom more training probably would have made little difference. So the result is that by the end of the episode, Skye learns a lesson about training harder and committing herself to becoming a real field agent, but the lesson doesn't feel quite as organic or earned as it should. And while Skye is fleshed out a bit here and becomes somewhat more likable as a character, at the same time, the issues that I think some fans were having with the super awesome hacker stuff are either not really addressed or portrayed as a good thing, which I wasn't particularly wild about personally. So you might say that creatively there were a lot of improvements this week, and I really enjoyed everything about this Skye-centric mission, except Skye. There's a lot to like here. Ian Quinn's first appearance, more connective tissue with the narrative arc, not to mention the origin of freaking Graviton, but mainly this is Skye's story, and the use of her is problematic in ways that end up holding this episode back a bit. Thankfully, though, the writers would give Skye a break in the next installment, and the resulting story would be pretty encouraging. Find out why next time when we dive into episode 4 of season 1, I Spy. Until then, over, out.